Chapter 1408. Shibi was also influenced by Yang Chendong. He nodded and said, "Yes, to be able to join the Xianxia is the good fortune of these people." This was not flattery. It was the truest feeling he had after so many years. Back then he had almost starved to death. But now what he ate, what he wore, and what he lived in, which part of it was not satisfactory. It was because of this truest feeling that he wanted more Mongols to be like him. At least, they would not have to worry about food anymore. Hearing Shibi's sigh, Yang Chendong had a thought and said, "Commander Shibi has the heart of a bodhisattva. Since that is the case, I will leave the matter of persuading the army and the people to you. Is there a problem? Please open the granary and release the grain." Shibi cupped his fist as if he was prepared. Approved. Yang Chendong did not even frown. He knew better than anyone that agriculture was the foundation of a country. However, he also knew that without commerce, one would not be rich. Therefore, he had never relied on agriculture to make a fortune. He was also open to all aspects of agriculture. Not only did he encourage the people to farm, but he also set a protective price to prevent the price of grain from falling during good harvests. With the help of various policies, Xianxia had an unimaginable amount of grain. As long as he needed it, there would be an endless supply of grain from the 3 eastern provinces to the Far East and Siberia. Although at least 50% of the grain would be consumed along the way, Yang Chendong did not care about these losses. Just like when he came from the Far East, a few large grain transport teams also left the city. It would not be long before they arrived at Great Raven City to solve the grain problem. "On behalf of the people, I thank the king." Shibi cupped his fist and bowed solemnly. Then he left with the guards. Yang Chendong was accompanied by leader Wang Guang from the security bureau to his residence in the city. Wang had made a great military contribution this time. Not only had he saved a Huli Khan, but he had also left behind the 2 main culprits, Ziker and Busi. Hearing that he had wasted a grenade because of this, Yang Chendong laughed and said to Beta Persei, "When group leader Wang leaves, give him 2 boxes of grenades. All right, give him a gun. Don't forget." "Yes, young master," Beta Persei agreed with a chuckle. Wang's face was naturally filled with gratitude. When he thought about how he could finally wear a spear, and how it was personally given to him by the 6th young master, how glorious it was, he couldn't stop smiling. From Wang, Yang Chendong had a clearer understanding of the situation in Great Wu City. "Oh, according to you, Huli is a talent. Then I'd like to meet him. Group leader Wang, please make the arrangements." Wang immediately gave a military salute, then waved his hand to call over a team member and gave him a few instructions. Yang Chendong's residence in Great Wu City was where a Huli used to live. The area was not small, and there were 5 courtyards. However, the things inside were too simple and crude. It could be seen that this Mongolian tribe was really poor. Even the Khan's living conditions were like this. While he was admiring the courtyard that didn't have many things, a Huli was brought to the courtyard by the Black Cavalry. When Yang Chendong turned his head, the first thing he exclaimed was that a Huli was a tiger general. He was almost 8 feet tall, and his arms were long. It was just that he didn't know if his arms reached his knees. Sinner General Ahuli greets King Wunan of Damyang. He had already heard a lot about Yang Chendong's deeds from Wang. As soon as he saw him, he willingly knelt on the ground. The stronger one was, the more they admired the strong. Clearly, in Ahuli's eyes, Yang Chendong was the strongest of the strong. When he saw Ahuli standing upright even though he was kneeling, and was even taller than some people who were squatting, Yang Chendong couldn't help but sigh. It was a waste not to lead troops with this kind of figure. "Yes, you are Ahuli, the Khan of this Mongolian tribe? Bugnam of Gojoseon, don't humiliate Sinner General. In your eyes, how could I dare to be called Khan?" Ahuli had already heard from Wang that the King Wunan of Damyang in front of him had the title of Heavenly Khan. It was he who led the army to defeat the Wala and the Tartar Mongol branch. Speaking of which, who knew how much stronger they were? In the eyes of such people, his position as the great Khan looked so laughable. Yang Chendong admired Ahuli's ability to read the situation. It was because of this that he asked, Ahuli, if this king allows you to lead troops to expand your territory, would you be willing? Ahuli, who was kneeling on the ground, suddenly raised his head. His eyes widened in disbelief as he said, Bugnam of Gojoseon allows me to lead troops, but I am a sinner general. What about sinner general? I won't hide it from you. At least half of the 5-star army is made up of sinner generals. However, ever since they joined the army, their performance has improved. Now, the highest is already a commander. That's right, he also has half of your Mongolian bloodline. This person is in the city. If you have the chance, you can go and talk to him. Yang Chendong thought of parting ways and said with a smile. Hearing that there was someone like him, Ahuli was immediately interested. Bugnam of Gojoseon, the sinner general wants to meet with this person and talk to him before making a decision. Is that possible? Of course. Men, take him to parting ways. Tell him that this king said so. Tell Commander Parting to tell him everything he knows. Yang Chendong did not intend to force Ahuli to become a commander. A forcibly picked melon would not be sweet. If Ahuli still wanted to govern a place after meeting parting ways, then he would let him leave the army and start as a small official. The Yang faction had developed to this point, and both the number of generals and civil officials had greatly increased. Although with the expansion of the territory, it was still somewhat insufficient, but it was no longer as strained as before. The Great Raven City was taken down by Yang Chendong with the smallest price. This was also because of Yunji meeting. On the other hand, in Wuxi City to the north, Tianhu's 1st Cavalry Army couldn't find a suitable opportunity, so they set up their formation and engaged in a bloody battle with Hurahan. Last year, Hulahan led 30,000 iron cavalry into the Far East region and took advantage of the chaos to enter All City. However, when Yang Chendong led his army to All City, they suffered several defeats in succession. Even great General Akmu died in battle. In the end, not only did they lose All City, they only brought back 10,000 iron cavalry. With their strength greatly reduced, they became much more obedient. After returning to All City, they began to recruit new soldiers. They were waiting for the time when they were strong enough to take revenge. During this time, he was afraid that someone would cause trouble for him, so he sent a messenger to the Great Raven City to instigate a rebellion. This was also a way to weaken the enemy's strength. Hulahan was not like Ahuli. He did not know how to prioritize the common people. In his opinion, the common people would always be common people. They were only fit to be his slaves, his soldiers, and die for him. His thinking was not right, so the treatment of soldiers was very poor. As a result, the expansion of his army was not very smooth. After half a year, he finally recruited 5,000 soldiers with great difficulty. Before he could even gather enough war horses for these 5,000 new soldiers, the world's #1 cavalry army suddenly appeared. When he found out that the 5-star army was coming, Hulahan did not put up any resistance out of instinct. Under the protection of the new general Yilahan, he led 5,000 of the most elite cavalry to escape. His fighting ability was average, but his escaping ability was top-notch. Afraid of being caught, Hulahan escaped with a light carriage. His speed was not something that Tianhu could catch up to. In the end, he could only watch as Hulahan escaped from his sight. Without the protection of the Great Khan, the Mongolian army was nothing more than a pile of loose sand. When Tianhu took out the 5 cannons that accompanied the army and began to bombard the city gate, there was a loud explosion accompanied by cries and screams. The city gate was opened, and the city was in chaos. Different from the firearms of this era, they only used solid bullets. Compared to the bombs used by the 5-star army, the difference was too great. The moment the cannons exploded, many things were already decided. When the cannons blew open the city gate, it also destroyed the morale of the Mongolian soldiers. The 5-star army's cavalry was like a ferocious tiger descending from the mountain as they neatly entered the city. This allowed the soldiers and commoners in the city to see what a true elite was. After seeing the world's #1 cavalry army in high spirits and well-equipped, the commoners who originally did not have a good impression of Hulahan completely gave up on resisting. In their eyes, no matter how bad their lives were, could it be worse than having Hulahan as their great Khan? Tian, who was Yang Chendong's student and could be considered an all-rounder. He knew that it was easier to conquer a country than to defend it. After taking over the city, he sent a telegram to Chenbo in the Far East, asking him to send people to transport military supplies and send local officials to take over the city. At the same time, he calmed the hearts of the commoners and did the same thing as Yang Chendong, opening up the granaries to the commoners. The two armies unexpectedly descended from the sky, and the Siberian region quickly became part of the Xia's territory. A month later, this matter finally reached the ears of the Golden Horde and the Rasi principalities. After Hulahan escaped, the first person he sought refuge with was the great Khan of the Golden Horde, Ulhe Mahama. Genghis Khan's descendants had established 4 khanates, namely the Golden Horde, also known as the Kipchak Khanate, the Chagatai Khanate, the Ajadai Khanate, and the Ili Khanate. The Golden Horde was conquered by Genghis Khan's eldest son, Joki, and grandson. After Genghis Khan's death, only his direct descendants, namely Joki, Chagatai, Ajadai, and Talyui's descendants, were known as the Golden Horde and had the right to inherit the Khanate's throne. After Talyui's son, Monk, became the great Khan of the Mongols, the range was further narrowed down to Talyui's descendants. The Yuan dynasty emperors and the Ming dynasty Khans, such as Dayan Khan, all came from this line. Chapter 1409. In 1242, Batu suddenly retreated back to Russia and led his army to launch the Second Mongol Western Expedition. The Mongol Western Expedition quickly conquered the vast lands of Eastern Europe and the Caucasus. After the Western Expedition, Batu established the city of Batu Salai in the north of Astrakhan. The Volga River became the economic and political center of the Golden Horde. It had been more than 200 years since the Mongols first established themselves in Russia. Over the past 200 years, the resistance in Russia had become more and more intense. Even if Yang Chendong hadn't appeared, they would have become independent in the near future. However, with the arrival of Yang Chendong, history had to be rewritten. Ulhe Mahama was the current great Khan of the Golden Horde. He was the 39th monarch of the Golden Horde. He was the true commander of the Mongols in this vast region. Hulahan brought 5,000 elite cavalry to join the Golden Horde. Mahama took them under his wing based on the principle of strength in numbers. However, his son, Bora, objected to this. Mahama was almost 60 years old. His son, Bora, had already grown up. Not only that, but his grandson, Hanyad Ali, would also become a general who could mount a horse and fight in battle. It was this inheritance that allowed his family to sit on the great Khan's throne for so long. Bora, who had long been listed as the successor, objected. Even Mahama had to take this seriously. The father and son discussed the issue of Hulahan in the palace of Salai. "Father, I object to accepting Hulahan." Bora's voice was loud and clear. He was tall and strong, and his voice was full of energy. In contrast, Mahama wore a tiger skin draped over his shoulders. He leaned back on his dragon throne and said calmly, "Reason?" Bora, who was used to his father's way of speaking, immediately said, "Father, Hulahan offended the 5-star army. This time, he only brought 5,000 cavalry. If we give up on our friendship with General Wu Sheng because of them, we will lose the big picture for the small." The Wu Sheng Bola spoke of was the commander of the 5-star army's 3rd army, Wu Sheng, who had arrived in this area a few years ago. When Wu Sheng first arrived, he was ostracized by the local forces. Not only the Mongol soldiers, but even the White Russian soldiers were not friendly to them. It wasn't until he displayed his strength, fought a few tough battles, and achieved victory that he finally received everyone's recognition. But even so, due to the short time they had spent in the Golden Horde and the long journey, it was difficult for them to obtain the support of the Xianxia headquarters. Their development was also very slow. Now, they had only established New Xia City in the northern part of the Golden Horde, and their range of activities was limited to that area. The Golden Horde's territory was a barren land to begin with, and they also had some military strength. For the Golden Horde, the gains from such a long expedition were indeed very limited, so they had been tolerating their existence. But no matter what, it was still a decent military force. Furthermore, New Xia City was not far from the Ross Duchy's territory, making it a target for the Golden Horde to rope in. They wanted to use Wusheng to suppress the Ross Duchy, which would make it easier for them to attack their opponents. This also made Wusheng's position in the Third Army higher, making it easier for him to find a way to survive in the cracks between the two sides. This was one of the Golden Horde's military strategies against external forces, and it was also recognized by everyone. But now, they had to make an enemy out of Wusheng for the sake of 5,000 Mongol soldiers. No matter how you looked at it, it was not worth it. Bora had doubts in his heart. Mahama slowly opened his eyes. What's wrong? You can't hold it in anymore? Father, it's not that I can't hold it in. It's that your son thinks that we will lose the big picture for the small. Bora's eyes were wide open, his face full of dissatisfaction. Looking at his somewhat childish son, Mahama knew that some things had to be made clear. He simply asked, Father, let me ask you. Who is our biggest enemy right now? Of course it's the Ross Duchy. Bora didn't know why he would ask such a question. Even a 3-year-old child in the horde would know this. That's right. Mahama nodded. In recent years, our warriors have been arrogant, greedy, and unambitious. They have long since lost the courage and bravery of their ancestors. On the other hand, the Ross Duchy, under the leadership of the Grand Duke of Blindness, Vasily II's nickname, has become stronger and stronger. Although they are not as strong as us, the gap between us will slowly shrink. If this continues, there will come a day when we will not be their match. They will be our greatest enemy. Bora agreed with this point. He had been working hard for this. At least his Mongol branch had changed. They had begun to practice horsemanship and strengthen themselves. But the Golden Horde wasn't just under their control. There were other branches that were also quite powerful. Their lack of effort, however, was a source of great indignation to Bowler. He always thought that if all the Mongol soldiers had followed his example, it would not be impossible for them to restore the glory of their ancestors to their former glory. Bora nodded in agreement. Mahama smiled and said, Now that we know who our biggest enemy is, what do you think we should do now that a third force has appeared? Should we pull one of them over and fight the other? Or should we watch the other two fight while we reap the benefits? Of course we should reap the benefits. Bora answered instinctively without hesitation. After saying this, he suddenly shut his mouth. Then, he thought of something and said, Father, do you mean to let Wusheng and the Ross dukedom fight while we watch from the sidelines? Mahama was very pleased that his son understood his meaning so quickly. With such a son, at least one day when he grew old, he could finally leave in peace. That's right. That's what my father thinks. However, we can't just stand by and do nothing. I'm afraid that the blind Grand Duke won't agree to this either. Therefore, we still have to send out our troops. However, we have to see how we can achieve the greatest victory with the least cost. Father, I understand now. You mean to say that we should first cooperate with the Ross dukedom to deal with Wusheng's army while they are closer to each other. That way, we can watch them fight and then reap the benefits, right? Bowler said, Father, I understand now. What you mean is that we should first cooperate with the Ross dukedom to deal with Wusheng's army. Well said. That's exactly what Father means. Think about it. Since we are already going to war with Wusheng, why don't we accept Hulahin's surrender? He has 5,000 elite cavalry. Mahama chuckled. Bora finally understood Mahama's meaning. Excitement appeared on his face. Was the war finally about to begin? He, as a hero, could finally be put to use. This was something he had been looking forward to for a long time. But then he thought of something and said worriedly, Father, how many men does Wusheng have? Can they be a match for the Ross Duchy's army? Of course they can't, but didn't Hulahin say that? King Wunan of Daimyong is here. With them, we should have the strength to fight. Mahama said as if he was giving advice. King Wunan of Daimyong? Those two-legged sheep? When Bora said this, a trace of disdain appeared in his eyes. Two-legged sheep was a term that the Mongol cavalry used to call the weak Han Chinese. In their eyes, the Han Chinese were too weak and they were like sheep that could be taken at any time. The only difference was that they lacked 2 legs. In other words, It was the same reason that some people in history called the Han Chinese the sick man of East Asia. No. Mahama shook his head and said, "These two-legged sheep are very different. They are very good at war. The Wara and Tatar tribes have been defeated by them. Moreover, this King Wunan of Daimyong is very good at scheming and bewitching people. According to Hulahan, the enemy's army is not made up of Han Chinese. They have us Mongols and many other races. There is even a White Russian division with over 20,000 men. He is just like our ancestors, full of ambition." Speaking of this, Mahama seemed to have recalled something and a look of yearning appeared on his face. Bora, on the other hand, fell into deep thought. It could be said that he understood his father very well. This Wunan Wang of the great Ming dynasty could be valued by his fathers so much. It could be seen that he was not an ordinary person. However, the more it was like this, the more he wanted to meet this person. He did not believe that a two-legged sheep could go against the heavens. Bora was convinced by his father, and the matter of Hulahan's defection became a matter of course. The next step was to send a message to the Ras duchies, stating that they detested General Wu Sheng and the Han army in New Xia City. This was originally their world, and even if there was a battle, it should be decided between them, not an outsider. In addition, there was news that the master behind Wu Sheng, King Wunan of Daimyong, had led an army from afar. In order to prevent them from becoming stronger after meeting, it was time to eliminate this armed force. The capital of the Rasi principalities. Vasily II, the Grand Duke of Moscow. Because he was blinded, his vision was extremely limited, and he was nicknamed the Grand Duke of Blindness. During Vasily II's reign, almost all the independent feudal territories within the Grand Duchy of Moscow were abolished. The independence of the republican city-states of Novgorod, Vyatka, and Pskov was weakened. History said that he did a lot of preparatory work for Ivan III Vasilyevic to unify Russia. He was an extremely capable talent in troubled times. The letter sent by Mahama was already in the hands of the Grand Duke of Blindness. After he learned the contents of the letter, he summoned a group of officials to discuss specific military matters. Among them was the extremely famous Ivan the Great in Russian history. In 1440 AD, the second son of Vasily II, the Lord of the Grand Duchy of Moscow, was born. Vasily II's first son, Yuri, died at an early age, so Vasily II placed a lot of hope on this child. According to the suggestion of the Archbishop of the Moscow Principality, the child was named Ivan, which later became Ivan the Great. Chapter 1410. His son Ivan, his generals Boris, Pyotr, Sergei, as well as Maxim from Novgorod, Turgenev from Vyatka, and Vanya from Pskov were involved in the meeting. The first thing the blind duke did was to announce Mahama's letter to the public. After that, he sat there quietly. He knew that after reading the letter, his subjects would definitely have something to say. As expected, after the letter was passed around, one of the generals, Sergei, was the first to speak. "Grand Duke, this is a good thing. As long as we occupy New Xia City, it will be equivalent to expanding our influence. This will be a great boost to our duchy and our Russian independence." Previously, they were afraid that the Mongols would suddenly interfere when they made a move on New Summer City. Now that the Mongols had the same idea and no longer had any concerns, it was time to make a move. "Yes, we agree." Maxim and the others immediately voted in favor. Under the pressure of the blind Grand Duke, the power in their hands was getting smaller and smaller. If there was a chance to expand their influence, it would be a great opportunity to develop their strength. Naturally, no one wanted to miss out on something beneficial. After a while, several people spoke. Only Supreme General Boris and Ivan remained silent. They seemed to be thinking about something. The blind Grand Duke didn't hear them say anything, so he knew that they must have other ideas. He took the initiative to ask, "Ivan, what do you think?" "Father-in-law, I don't have any ideas. Everything will be done according to everyone's wishes." Ivan raised his head. His voice was calm, but in his heart he was somewhat unwilling. As early as when Wu Sheng first appeared here with the new army, Ivan had already dealt with them. At that time, Wuxia had received Yang Chendong's order to help the Rasi Duchy resist the pressure of the Golden Horde to the best of his ability. After the cooperation, the relationship between the two sides quickly became closer. It was also from then on that Ivan gained a better understanding of this Han army called the Five-Star Army. This army was well-equipped and well-trained. They fought in a methodical manner. Many of their advanced military concepts were often eye-catching. Furthermore, they often cooperated with each other to deal with the military oppression of the Mongol army. Gradually, Ivan began to have thoughts of using them for his own purposes. For this reason, Ivan made a heavy promise. He said that as long as Wuxia was willing to lead the army and surrender to him, he would become one of the great generals of the Ras Duchy in the future. At that time, there would not be many people in the entire country who would have a more important position than him. With such a promise, Wuxia only said that he would consider it. At that time, Ivan was still full of confidence, but after several years, he still did not receive an answer, so he knew that the other party was tactfully rejecting him. Although Ivan was puzzled by this, he had never given up on the idea of making the other party surrender. In his opinion, the Five-Star Army was too far away, and there were many things that were beyond his reach. As long as he sincerely invited them, they would definitely be moved by his sincerity. However, the situation hadn't come to a conclusion yet. The main force of the Five-Star Army had actually arrived as reinforcements. This made him completely lose all hope of getting the other party to surrender. It was inevitable that he would feel disappointed, but he was a determined person after all. Since this path did not work, he would not think about it anymore. It was just a pity for a talent like Wuxia. Right? The main force of the Five-Star Army had arrived. He heard that his master, King Wunan of Daoist, had also come. If that was the case, would Wuxia realize his prowess after he defeated this opponent? Would it be possible for him to come under his banner? Unknowingly, Ivan was filled with anticipation for Yang Chendong's arrival. He wanted to see what kind of ability this person had to be able to make a valiant general like Wuxia work for him. Now that Ivan had expressed his stance, only great General Boris was left. This was a person that even the blind Duke respected greatly. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that this person's words could sometimes be compared to several people, especially when it came to military matters. He had the ability to keep his word. After asking Ivan, Boris knew that it was time for him to express his stance. He summarized his thoughts and said, "Speaking of the Han army in New Summer City, they can't be considered our friends anymore. Although they helped us fight a few battles with the Mongol army a few years ago and played a big role, as the Mongol army gradually restrained their blade rays and we continued to grow stronger, they didn't do anything for us anymore. Dealing with them is something that should be done." This meant that he agreed, but everyone knew that Boris didn't finish his words. He must have something else to say. Sure enough, Boris continued to express his stance. This time, the Mongol Khan made his stance clear and decided to make a move on New Summer City. Moreover, he intentionally sent us away. This clearly means that he wants to borrow our hands to deal with Wuxia. Moreover, I heard that Wuxia's master is about to arrive. If we act rashly and fail, countless variables will appear in the outcome of this matter. This is very disadvantageous to me. You should know that King Wunan of the Great Ming Dynasty was able to build a 20,000-strong White Russian army. This is enough to prove that this person has some means. Otherwise, why would our people risk their lives for him? Either we don't make a move against such an opponent, or if we do, we have to beat them until they have no choice but to retreat from this area. Well said. Great General Peter echoed loudly, "This King Wunan of Daoist actually dares to build a White Russian army and use our people to fight. Does he really think that we don't exist? This kind of person needs to be taught a lesson." After everyone reached a consensus, a smile appeared on the face of Grand Duke Blindness, who was sitting at the head of the table. "Well, since no one raises any objections, this matter will be handed over to General Boris. Everyone has to cooperate with him unconditionally. This is also a very important step in our expansion. We must win and we must not lose." Yes, Grand Duke. Everyone at the meeting loudly agreed. Thus, a large net was spread out to target Wuxia in New Summer City. New Summer City. It was originally an abandoned White Russian tribe's old site. But ever since Wu Sheng brought the new summer army here, he had begun to rebuild it. Taking into account the raw materials, although the city wasn't very big, it was still enough to support 200,000 to 300,000 people. Standing in the courtyard, Wu Sheng's face had a hint of vicissitudes of life. He stood straight and seemed to be thinking about something. If one paid attention to him, they would notice that his expression would occasionally become somewhat agitated. Sometimes, he would frown deeply, as if he was thinking about some difficult problem. Needless to say, he was happy. There was already news that the sixth young master had set out from Siberia and was heading towards him. When he thought about how he hadn't seen the sixth young master for 9 years, the longing in his heart grew stronger. This feeling of reuniting after a long time naturally made him happy. But while he was happy, he was also somewhat worried. In the past 9 years, he hadn't completed his mission very well. Until now, he had only occupied an isolated city with more than 30,000 soldiers and more than 100,000 people. Due to the inconvenient transportation, Wu Sheng's progress in Xianxia's development would be delayed by a lot. But he also knew that in the past 9 years, Yang Chendong had built a huge empire, made a lot of contributions, and conquered a lot of territory. In comparison, his own small achievements were somewhat unpresentable. He didn't know if the sixth young master would be satisfied or angry when he saw him. Although he said that he was alone and didn't have any support, he had brought his army with him. But after all, they had brought an army with them when they came. Although they had expanded a little compared to before, it was still very limited. This couldn't be considered a great achievement. With a sigh, Wu Sheng was dissatisfied with his own achievements in these 9 years. When Yang Chendong was developing and growing, wasn't he also alone? At that time, he didn't have the help of these armies. But to what extent did they achieve, and to what extent did he achieve? It was really infuriating to compare oneself to others. Just as he was sighing, the head of the guards, Zhu Zhen, appeared in the small courtyard with a secret letter. Military commander, there's news. Surviving in the cracks, whether it was the Golden Horde or the Rossi Principalities, they were not existences that he could contend against. In such an environment, Wu Sheng attached great importance to intelligence work. In his opinion, a good piece of intelligence and a good intelligence officer could be equivalent to 10,000 elite soldiers at a critical time. Because of this, although he didn't expand his territory and the number of personnel was very limited, his intelligence work was progressing well. He had a stable source of information in these 2 large forces. Reaching out to take the report, Wu Sheng opened it and read. Soon, his expression became very serious. Military commander, did something big happen? Commander Zhu Zhen asked with concern. As Wu Sheng's most trusted person, he knew that ordinary small problems wouldn't attract intelligence officers to send reports. After all, spying was the best. If he didn't want to be exposed, he had to be less active. Since the report was sent, it was enough to prove that something big had happened. Looking at Wu Sheng's expression, it also confirmed this point. Yes, something big has happened. The Mongolian Khan is going to attack us. He even informed the blind duke. It won't be long before the enemy's troops arrive. They actually joined forces? Zhu Zhen was very shocked when he heard the news. The Mongolians and the White Russians were mortal enemies. They had been at war for hundreds of years. How could they join forces just like that? The sixth young master once said that there are no eternal friends, only eternal interests. Obviously, our existence has made some people worried, especially the sixth young master who is about to bring his main forces. They are afraid that we will attack them from the inside. Wu Sheng's face showed a trace of a bitter smile, but it was immediately replaced by a determined expression. You want to deal with me? No matter how strong you are, what can you do? Commander Zhu, we should also make some preparations. There are some things that should be settled. Chapter 1411. Ever since the Mongols weakened and the White Russians became stronger, Wu Sheng knew that New Xia would be besieged one day, but he didn't expect it to be so soon. Presumably, it had something to do with the sixth young master's imminent arrival. If it was in the past, Wu Sheng would have considered bowing to one of the powers in exchange for some space to survive. But now, the sixth young master was coming. He should make some achievements for the world to see. He had endured humiliation for so many years, and it was time to show his sword. Zhu Jun was also excited at this moment. Was the army commander finally going to fight a big battle? This was great. As a soldier, war was the best platform to show one's worth. He must seize this opportunity. Next, under Wu Sheng's signal, the whole new Xia became busy. The commoners were persuaded to leave one after another. They were advised to find a safe place and return only after New Xia City was completely safe. The army also began to mobilize before the war. But anyone with a mind and knowledge could feel that this was going to be a big battle. For a moment, everyone became nervous, afraid, and excited. It didn't take long for the Grand Duke of Blindness to hear about what happened in New Xia City. When he heard that New Xia was ready for war, he knew that the news must have been leaked. But he couldn't figure out whether the person who leaked the news was from the Golden Horde or his own men. He only knew that some things needed to be done quickly. He sent for his son, Ivan, to inform him of the situation. Then he asked, "How is the army's preparation?" "Father-in-law, the time is still too short. If the army is to be assembled and ready, it will take at least 10 to 15 months. Ivan didn't expect Wu Sheng to get the news so quickly. His face couldn't help but turn ugly. "No, it's too long. We can't wait. How about this? Isn't Kashgar the closest to New Xia? Let's mobilize troops from there first. In a while, take my order to Beojil and send troops from there. Don't ask to take the city immediately, just entangle their main force." The blind duke shook his head. The opportunity was fleeting. Since the enemy was already prepared, they couldn't wait any longer. Otherwise, the situation would change even more as time passed. Bowler also knew that his father-in-law was right. He was also worried that the Han reinforcements wouldn't arrive as time passed. If that was the case, then it would be troublesome. He immediately gave the order to go. At the same time that the Ross Empire made the decision, the Golden Horde also sent a light cavalry of 30,000 men from the northernmost Beojil to New Xia. The two armies, one in the west and one in the south, vowed to destroy Wu Sheng in New Xia. During this period of time, the evacuation of the civilians in the city was basically completed. When Wu Sheng saw that there were no longer any civilians on the originally bustling streets, he knew that it was time to abandon the city. That's right, Wu Sheng had never thought of defending New Summer City to the death. Otherwise, he wouldn't have sent the commoners out of the city. As for why he wanted to defend, it was because he knew that there was an enemy spy in the new army, and this spy's status wasn't low. Now that he was about to leave the city, it was time to get rid of this spy buried in the army. Zhu Jun passed down the order to convene the meeting. The Third Army was originally the Yang Xie's trump card. The soldiers under its command were the earliest Lung Feng soldiers. However, they hadn't received the support of a single Yang Xie soldier for 9 years. Now, the army was in chaos. They were no longer pure Han like they used to be. Apart from the Lung Feng's 3rd Division, which was still made up of Lung Feng soldiers, the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd Divisions were made up of young men from Mongolia and Russia. Apart from these 4 divisions, there was also the Nuzan Cavalry Division under the command of the Third Army. In the large tent, Wu Sheng sat at the head of the table. Below him stood the 3rd Division's Division Commander Chun Yang and the Nuzan Cavalry Division's Division Commander Yi La. Below them stood the 1st Division's Division Commander Min Fu, the 2nd Division's Division Commander Luo Rui, and the 3rd Division's Division Commander Dan Shi. When Wu Sheng saw that all the military officers above the division level were present, he first swept his gaze across everyone. His gaze was unfathomable. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have received intelligence that the Rossi Duchy of the Golden Horde has sent an army to our New Xia City. In line with the principle of saving the people and losing the land, I have decided to abandon New Xia City and leave this place." What? When he said this, the 5 division commanders were shocked. Obviously, this was the first time they had heard this news. Wu Sheng sat at the head of the table and saw everyone's reaction. Especially when he saw the 3rd Division's Division Commander Dan Shi, he sneered. After a long while, the 5 division commanders stopped their discussion and looked at Wu Sheng. They wanted to continue listening to their commander. They also wanted to ask, since they were not going to defend the city, why did they still dig a horse trap outside the city? What was the use of doing these useless things? Wu Sheng had already guessed what everyone was thinking. His lips moved and he said, I know that everyone must have a lot of questions. Well, I will explain it to you. Division Commander Dan, you say it. Dan Shi, the 3rd Division's division commander, was suddenly called out. This made him, who was already nervous and had an ugly expression, tremble uncontrollably. When he noticed that everyone was looking at him, he knew that he had to open his mouth. He pretended to be confused and said, Military commander, why? I don't know either. You still don't know? Don't you always tell the great Khan of the Golden Horde about our 3rd Division's actions? Why are you saying that you don't know now? Wu Sheng said with interest. The moment Wu Sheng's words fell, Dan Shi's expression changed drastically. He instinctively wanted to draw his saber, but Zhu Zhen, who had been watching him from the side, was 1 step faster than him. He grabbed Dan Shi's right arm and restrained him with a twist of his arm. He didn't forget to say, What's wrong, Division Commander Dan? Are you going to reveal your true intentions? Dan Shi rolled his eyes and immediately shouted, It's a misunderstanding. It's all a misunderstanding. Why would I draw my sword? What you want to do, everyone can see it clearly. Do you think you can still quibble at this time? Men, take him away. Zhu Zhen shouted coldly, and 4 soldiers from the guard regiment walked in from outside the hall. They were holding ropes, and it was obvious that they were prepared. They tied Dan Shi up tightly in no time. Seeing that he could no longer move, Dan Shi knew that his plan was over. He had no choice but to risk everything and shout, Surrender! How can you be a match for the Golden Horde? If you surrender now, I can put in a few good words for you and spare your lives. Shut his mouth and behead him. Wu Sheng, who was sitting at the head of the table, pulled a long face. He was about to die, but he still wanted to bewitch others. Even if he was killed 1,000 times, it wouldn't be too much. Dan Shi was taken away, and the hall became quiet again. However, it could be seen that everyone's faces were a little ugly, especially the head of the 1st Division, Min Fu. He was originally half Mongolian, and like Dan Shi, he was not a pure Han. He was also worried that the same method would be used on him. But Wu Sheng changed his angry look and comforted, Dan Shi is willing to be a dog of the Golden Horde. That is his ambition. But he shouldn't betray the 5-star army for his promotion and wealth. So it's not a pity to kill him. But you are different. You are loyal. I know this, and so does Bugnam of Gojoseon. You can relax. With these words, everyone's expression became better. Especially Chun Yang, the commander of the 3rd Division, and Yi La, the commander of the Nuzan Cavalry Division. There was a faint excitement in their eyes. Both of them had fought with Yang Chendong and knew how powerful the 6th young master was. They had received news that the 6th young master was coming from Siberia. They should be able to meet him soon. Thinking that the 6th young master was coming, their bitter days would come to an end. Now was the time for them to perform well. They couldn't help but feel a little excited. Now, they naturally listened to Wu Sheng's words. Wu Sheng was also in a good mood. After dealing with the traitor, Dan Shi, he felt more at ease. He ordered, Gan Feng will take over the position of the 3rd Division's commander. Everyone else's position will remain unchanged. After the meeting, everyone should prepare to leave the city. This time, I want to disappoint the enemy. They spent a lot of effort but still couldn't find us. To put it nicely, it was a strategic retreat. To put it bluntly, it was a retreat. Wu Sheng had no choice. With more than 30,000 men under his command, he really couldn't fight the enemy head-on. Otherwise, he would be digging his own grave. After the meeting, the division commanders returned to their troops. Half a day later, New Summer City became an empty city. Except for the city walls and houses that couldn't be moved, nothing that could be used in the future was left behind. 2 days later, the 30,000 infantrymen of the Ross Duchy, led by Ivan, were the first to arrive outside New Summer City. When they saw the city gates open, they didn't dare to enter directly. Instead, they arranged for 100 people to enter the city to take a look. Only after he was certain that everyone in the city had left did he enter the city. As soon as they entered, they saw an extremely poor and empty city. After searching for half a day, they couldn't find a single grain of food. As for cattle, horses, and sheep, they couldn't even find their feces. Half a day later, the 30,000 cavalrymen of the Golden Horde arrived and got the same result. Chapter 14:12. Ivan was naturally very angry that Wuxia had retreated without a fight. What made him even angrier was that the general of the Golden Horde actually wanted to occupy a city that had nothing. In a fit of anger, he ordered his men to burn down all the houses in New Summer City and tear down the city walls. He even had someone leave a letter on the broken city wall with the words, "Wuxia is a coward," written in large letters. Ivan left angrily, leaving behind the general of the Golden Horde, who didn't know whether to laugh or cry. There was nothing to linger about in such a deserted city. He had no choice but to retreat and report back to his superiors. When New Summer City regained its silence and desolation, the scouts sent by Wuxia rushed back. When they saw that the city had been destroyed to this point, they were naturally very angry. Especially when they saw the words left on the broken wall, they turned around and left. They wanted to tell the army commander what had happened here and let the army commander make a decision. In the forest not far away, Wuxia met the scouts who had returned to report and learned of what had happened in New Summer City. His eyes immediately turned blood red. He was very angry. The destruction of the city meant that his years of hard work had been destroyed. How dare they call him a coward? Did they really think that he couldn't do anything to them? Gather all troops. Target Toph City. Set out. Wuxia decided to give them a taste of their own medicine. Although he didn't have the strength to attack a strong city, he had no problem dealing with a few small cities in the Ross Duchy. As long as he was fast enough and retreated in time, there shouldn't be any problems in terms of safety. The army commander made the decision. Although the division commanders thought that it was a little hasty, there was no such military plan before. But when they heard that New Summer City had been completely destroyed, they were all angry. No one tried to persuade the army commander, so they decided to take revenge. Toph City was about the size of a county. It was the northernmost city of the Ross Duchy. There were no more than 1,000 soldiers stationed here, and only about 20,000 civilians. A small city like this had neither resources nor wealth. Very few people would take a fancy to it. Therefore, when Wuxia appeared outside the city with more than 30,000 cavalrymen and entered the city without much effort, the people here either ran or fled. Those who couldn't escape would simply close their doors and hide in their homes, not daring to make a sound. Only a few people were injured, and they were injured by the Ross Empire's muskets. However, they were able to take over Toph City. This made Wuxia and the others feel less angry. Seeing that it was getting late, they decided to rest here for the night. They would also rob the city's storage of food and leave the next morning. It had only been one night, and there was no prior plan for this operation. Presumably, even the Russian Empire would not be able to find out about his goal. Wuxia, who was very confident about this, found a relatively large courtyard and went to sleep. In the middle of the night, the sound of galloping horses could be heard. The head of the guards, Zhu Zhen, pushed open the door and entered. He said with a panicked expression, "Military commander, something bad has happened. There are many people outside the city and they have surrounded us." "There's such a thing?" While feeling shocked, Wuxia put on his armor and quickly rushed up the tower. At this moment, several teachers were standing on top of the city gate tower. All of them had solemn expressions. Clearly, they had realized that the situation was not good. After Wuxia reached the top of the city gate tower, all he could see were torches. The number of enemies gave him a feeling that it was impossible to count. "Military commander, it's too dark. We can't see how many enemies are coming. We also don't know which direction to charge in. What should we do?" 3rd Division Commander Chunyang walked over and asked for military orders. Wuxia was not a god. If others couldn't see clearly, he naturally couldn't see clearly either. However, as a military commander, he still had the calmness that he should have. don't panic. We'll deal with whatever comes our way. Since we've been surrounded, we won't be able to figure out if there's an ambush outside. We might as well stay here and wait for reinforcements to come and rescue us. When the time comes, a bad thing will turn into a good thing. Although he said it so confidently, it frightened the other teachers. They were waiting for the military commander to decide which direction to break out of the encirclement, but they didn't expect that they would have to defend the city. Seeing that everyone's expression was not good, Wuxia said confidently, "What? Have you all forgotten? The sixth young master will be here soon. As long as we spread the news, it won't take long for reinforcements to arrive. We are no longer homeless children, rootless duckweeds." Chunyang nodded. "Then we'll defend the city. There's a lot of food in the city. We can hold on for a while until the sixth young master arrives. That will be the time for us to take revenge." Division Commander Yi Dai was also excited. As high-ranking officers who joined the 5-star army early on, they all treated Yang Chendong like a god. It was as if as long as the sixth young master arrived, there was nothing that couldn't be solved. Since the two teachers had expressed their opinions, the other three teachers couldn't say anything. Although they didn't know why everyone was so confident, the discipline in the 5-star army was strict. Once the military commander gave an order, everyone had to follow it. Otherwise, they would be beheaded. Seeing that everyone agreed, Wuxia said, "If that's the case, then send someone out to deliver the message. We have to inform the sixth young master as soon as possible." Is Vice Division Commander Lu Dai here? "I'm here." The Deputy Division Commander of the Nuzhen Cavalry Division, Lu Dai, stepped forward. "The sixth young master knows about you. This time, you'll be the one to deliver the message. Don't worry, you'll only take a few people out. They'll only treat you as a decoy and won't chase after you. Remember, before we find the main force, we can't rest for a moment. The hope of the Third Army is all on you." Wuxia walked up and patted Lu Dai's shoulder. Lu Dai felt a lot of pressure. He saluted and repeated, "Please don't worry, even if I die from exhaustion, I won't rest for a moment before we find the main force." Lu Dai left with less than 100 cavalry out of the city. Sure enough, as Wuxia had said, the enemy soldiers on the outer perimeter only stopped them for a moment, and then let them go. With the help of the enemy's torches, Wuxia heaved a sigh of relief when he saw that Lu Dai and the others had broken out of the encirclement. He then confidently said to everyone, "Leave a small group of people behind to guard the city. The rest of you can go back and sleep. Don't worry, it's so dark. We can't rush out and the enemy won't rush in." Being able to remain calm even if Mount Tai collapses in front of you was the style of a general. On this point, Wuxia had done it. In fact, his heart was not as calm as it seemed on the surface. He did not know where Yang Chendong had gone with the main army, nor did he know if Lu Dai could find them. However, as the commander of an army and the main general of the army, he had to cheer everyone on at this moment. Outside Tove City, Ivan was leading 70,000 White Russians to the city gate. They were waiting for Wuxia to escape. Their muskets were loaded with solid cartridges, their horses were saddled, and their soldiers were ready to provide support to the enemy at any time. Ivan was the one who burned down New Summer City and left the message. He didn't want to leave an empty city for the Golden Horde's army to live in, but he was also preparing to lure Wuxia into action. Previously, his relationship with Wuxia was quite good, so he had a good understanding of this person. He knew that such a hot-blooded man couldn't be provoked. So after he left New Summer City, he sent out a large number of scouts to keep an eye on these small cities. His intuition told him that Wuxia wouldn't let this go so easily. Sure enough, just as he met up with the 50,000 reinforcements sent by the duchy, he received a report that the Third Army was spotted outside Tove City. Immediately, he rushed over with his army and blocked the way. Ivan was satisfied, but he didn't let his guard down. After all, it was night time. The enemy couldn't see him, and he couldn't see them either. So he immediately ordered his men not to attack unless they had his orders. He had to wait for the New Summer Army's main force to leave the city before attacking. Because of this order, Lu Dai and his cavalry weren't troubled too much when they left. But after half a day, they still didn't see any movement in the city. This time, General Shigao was suspicious. Gongzi, could it be that Wu Sheng who escaped just now? Impossible. Without any hesitation, Ivan said with certainty, Wu Sheng is a man with a strong sense of pride. Running away from a battle is not something he would do. Because they were once friends, he dared to say this with confidence. Although he didn't know what Wu Sheng was thinking, he was confident that there would be a bloody battle between the two of them. The next step would be to see who was more powerful. The night passed just like that. Compared to the 5-star army, the White Russian army outside the city was much worse off. They had to be on guard against the people in the city escaping, so they didn't sleep much. So when the sun rose, the White Russian army didn't have the energy to immediately charge. When the sun rose, Wu Sheng, who was on the city wall, saw the White Russian army's true strength. When he saw that the enemy had an army of 70,000 with 30,000 cavalry and 20,000 musketeers, he could not help but rejoice that he had not rashly attacked last night. Otherwise, who knew how many soldiers he would have lost when the musketeers fired in the night? After seeing the enemy's true strength, Wu Sheng knew that this was going to be a tough battle. He placed all his hopes on Lu Dai, who had gone out to report the situation. As for himself, there was only one thing he had to do, and that was to set up a trap. For example, the White Russian army didn't immediately attack the city. This was what he wanted. He ordered his soldiers to defend the city well. There was no need to provoke the enemy. Then he went to check the city's warehouse. He had to calculate carefully to see how long the city's rations could last and how long he could last. He also wanted to see how much kerosene, wooden sleepers, and bows were left to defend the city. If they weren't complete, he would have to demolish the houses in the city. Chapter 1413. A country may be big, but a warmonger is bound to die. At this time, although the Yang faction was incomparably powerful, the pace of expansion was a little too fast. Just the external forces alone were divided into 3. Along the way, there were battles between the Ili region and several other countries. Hundreds of thousands of cavalrymen and infantrymen were mobilized there. Just the amount of food needed to feed the men and horses every day was not a small number, not to mention the fact that there were always deaths in war. Those who were injured needed money to be treated, those who died needed money to be buried, and those who died needed to be compensated. The second front was the sea. There were hundreds of thousands of soldiers, hundreds of ships, and thousands of cannons. Every time they fought, the amount of ammunition used was not small. Along the way were 100,000 cavalrymen, 1,000,000 peasants, and a steady stream of people from all over the world who were marching towards the Golden Horde from Siberia. The road was rugged, the distance was long, and the consumption was astronomical. Over time, it would form a considerable pressure on the finances. Fortunately, the Yang faction had a vast territory, and most of the provinces were already on the basis of self-sufficiency. They could effectively support the Yang faction headquarters. If it were any other dynasty, they probably wouldn't have been able to hold on. Even so, in the long run, it would be a burden on the finances. Yang Chendong knew this. When he led the troops into the Liaodong region, he made the decision to fight as quickly as possible. While there were disadvantages, there were also advantages. For example, when the navy attacked the cities, they seized a large amount of wealth and transported it back to Chichen City. There were not only gold and silver, but also a large number of minerals that Xianxia needed. This income had exceeded the cost of the navy. This was a good start, and it also made many people in Xianxia realize how useful the sea could be. It was because of this that no one openly questioned Yang Chendong's expansion. Even if someone said something, he might not care, and it would not affect the morale of the army. But it was good that nothing happened. There was also the silver mining in Shaowei province that was starting to show results. As more and more silver mines were discovered, the mining team mobilized hundreds of thousands of people. The amount of silver mined every day was not a small number. For this reason, Yangxia's treasury was greatly supported, and the pressure of needing money was not as great. As Yang Chendong thought about this, a smile appeared on his face. He had just received a piece of news that made him happy through the telegram. Feng Ke's research team in Crimson City, after he went back to teach them last time, had finally rushed out the first true steam engine. This was all thanks to the engine prototype that Yang Chendong had proposed, and after pushing it back, the experiment was finally successful. Historically, in 1679 AD, the French physicist Denis Barbin built the first working model of a steam engine after watching steam escape from his pressure cooker. His contemporary, Samuel Morand, also proposed the idea of a steam engine. Now that they had appeared more than 200 years earlier, Yang Chendong did not dare to imagine how great of an advantage they would have. Although the vacuum steam engine was now used to pump water into the mine, the principle was that after steam was introduced into the cylinder, the valve was closed, and then cold water was poured into the cylinder. When the steam condensed, it created a vacuum. The air pressure on the other side of the piston pushed the piston. In the mine, a rod that went deep into the shaft was connected to drive a pump. The movement of the steam engine's piston was transmitted through the rod to the pump's piston to pump water out of the well. But no matter what, there was still a steam engine. If there was one, there would be two. To the people of the future, this thing was not complicated. To put it bluntly, a steam engine needed a boiler that boiled water to produce high-pressure steam. This boiler could use wood, coal, oil, natural gas, or even combustible garbage as a heat source. The steam expanded to push the piston to work. Once the steam engine technology matured, it was widely used in power stations, factories, locomotives, ships, and other fields. It was especially used on warships as the only prime mover at that time. After the telegram was sent, Yang Chendong was excited and happy for a while. He knew that with the steam engine, whether it was mining or other fields, the efficiency would increase a lot. This was the beginning of real industrial development. He personally wrote a telegram praising the research team led by Feng Ku. He also gave a large reward and a second-class medal to show their merit. Xianxia had a total of 7 medals, representing 7 different merits. From low to high, they were iron, bronze, silver, gold medals, third class, second class, and the highest level, first-class medal. These medals were not only a symbol of status and honor, but they could also be used to exchange for large amounts of money and land with the Yang faction. In times of crisis, they could even save one's life and had some of the effects of the death exemption medal. This was a good thing that everyone in the Yang faction wanted, especially a second-class medal. As a second-class medal, it could probably be used to offset any mistakes other than those that committed a rebellion. This was the first time such a medal was issued, and Feng Ku was the first recipient. It was clear that Yang Chendong valued him highly. It was also clear that technology was the #1 development force. Who knew how many people were envious and jealous of him? At the same time, Yang Chendong also asked the other party to build more steam engines and continue to improve them, so that they could be a great help to Xia's development. In a good mood, Yang Chendong, who was riding on the white dragon, had a smile on his face. It wasn't until another telegram was sent in front of him that his good mood was broken. The telegram was sent by the commander of the world's first cavalry army, Tianhu. It said that the cavalry scouts he sent out met the deputy division commander of the 3rd Army, Lu Dai, at the border between the Ural region and the Northwest region. He learned from Lu Dai that the 3rd Army was besieged in Tove City and was waiting for reinforcements. Lu Dai didn't disappoint Wuxia. He led less than 80 cavalry out of the encirclement and ran for 3 days tirelessly. Along the way, many people fell behind and many died of exhaustion on the way to deliver the message. Finally, when Lu Dai was tired and hungry, he finally met the scouts of the world's first cavalry army and was able to send the message. This telegram didn't only say that Wuxia was besieged, it also said that the Golden Horde and the Ras Duchy were very hostile towards the 5-star army. Yang Chendong didn't expect that because of his sudden appearance, the two feuds would temporarily join forces. This wasn't a good thing for Yang Chendong, who was an outsider, and he couldn't allow this to happen. If they joined forces, then cut them off. Send a telegram to Commander Tianhu to rush to Tove City at all costs to save Wuxia and the other soldiers. At the same time, order my army to speed up. We will quickly give the Golden Horde a fierce blow. Tell them that this king is here. Yang Chendong said with an unfriendly expression. He always believed that if you offend me, I will pay you back. Many times he even took the initiative to look for trouble. Now, how could he back down just because these two forces joined forces? Moreover, this so-called alliance in Yang Chendong's eyes was more of a sign. He didn't believe that they would really care about each other's survival. They probably wanted each other to die early. This was his chance to destroy them one by one. After the telegram was sent, Tian, who saw the contents, and his expression brightened. The world's first cavalry army hadn't fought a hard battle since the expansion of the Free Division. Now was the time to challenge themselves. As the commander, Tian, who had always wanted to prove that Yang Chendong's choice was right. This expansion of the army not only greatly increased the number of soldiers, but also the strength of the army. Yang Xie's expenditure on the world's first cavalry army was worth it. Men, call 2nd Division Commander Lu Duo and 4th Division Commander Su De, Tian, whose voice was loud as he looked to the west. At this moment, his heart was filled with fighting spirit. Tove City. 7 days had passed. In these 7 days, Ivan led the White Russian army to attack dozens of times. With the help of the musketeers, the soldiers climbed up the city walls many times, but were chased down by Wu Sheng's soldiers. In these 7 days, both the attackers and the defenders had paid a heavy price. Tove City was also riddled with holes and looked like a fragile egg. Especially with the White Russian army's cannons in place, the attack would probably start tomorrow. In history, the reason why Ivan was able to succeed his father and lead the Russians to defeat the Golden Horde and achieve independence was because of the importance of their firearms. Otherwise, in terms of cold weapons, who would be a match for the Mongolian cavalry? At this time, the Rossi Duchy had bought many firearms from the West and had built some factories to develop firearms. In history, they were a military power, but now they were just in the embryonic stage. Even so, under the constant pressure of the Golden Horde, the Rossi Duchy's progress was quite fast. Although their foundation was weaker, in terms of combat strength, they were much stronger than the Great Ming Dynasty. This was what it meant when there was pressure, there was motivation. Relying on the flintlock in his hand, Ivan didn't suffer much during the siege, and it was only a 1 versus 2 battle. As the cannons were sent to the front line, one could imagine that the initiative was completely in his hands. As expected of a general, you actually forced me to this point. General Wu, tomorrow I will not hold back. Ivan stared fiercely at Tove City, which was 2 miles away, with his large, spirited eyes. After that, he turned around and left. He admired Wu Sheng and gave him absolute respect, which was to attack with all his might. Even so, he still let Wu Sheng defend the city for 7 days. Ivan could not help but sigh at Wu Sheng's strength. However, he knew that with the appearance of firearms, individual bravery was no longer important. Tomorrow, he would definitely break into the city. At that time, he would give Wu Sheng a chance to return to his side. Otherwise, he would have to kill him. Chapter 14:14. As the future Ivan the Great, he had an extremely firm belief. In his eyes, there were only 2 kinds of people. One was to be used by him, and the other was to be killed by him. It was because of this potential that he was able to create such glory and become the first person to achieve complete independence in the Russian Empire. On the city gate tower of Tove City, Wu Sheng heaved a sigh of relief when he saw the Russian army retreating again before dusk. However, his face did not look relaxed. The Third Army was able to hold on until now only because they were defending the city and Yang Chendong was coming. These gave them the belief to hold on. However, only Wu Sheng knew that the Third Army was already at the end of its rope. The rations in the city were running out, and the soldiers were exhausted after 7 days of continuous fighting. More importantly, they had long lost contact with the outside world. No one knew if Lu Dai had passed the news of them being surrounded to the main army, or even if he had found the main army, no one knew. It could be said that they were holding on because they did not know what was going to happen. Once the city gates were breached, they would be able to breathe a sigh of relief. It would probably be the time for the army to be defeated. Wu Sheng raised his head and looked to the east. There was a glimmer of hope and determination in his eyes. He had already made a decision. If the reinforcements could not arrive in time, he would shed his blood in Tove City to repay Yang Chendong's kindness. This might be the last thing he could do. Commander, the scouts have discovered that the Russian army's artillery has entered the camp. The battle tomorrow will be much more dangerous. The Nuzhen Cavalry Division requests to join the battle. Just as Zi Wuxing was lost in his thoughts, Commander Yellow walked to his side and gave him a standard military salute before speaking in a decisive voice. The Nuzhen Cavalry Division was a group of veterans who had followed Wuxing all the way from the first city. At that time, it was only a cavalry division. Later, as the army continued to expand, it was upgraded. In the past 9 years, there were not many veterans left in the division. Most of them had died in the war, but their combat power had never decreased. Soldiers who grew up in the flames of war had always been brave and fearless. It was because of the Nuzhen Cavalry Division's combat power that Wuxing did not send them up the city gate tower, no matter how difficult it was. Since they were the most elite cavalrymen, of course, they would only be able to display their advantage if they were mounted on war horses. Wuxing's lips moved, but in the end he nodded and agreed. He knew that this was the last moment. Just like how Yifan understood him, he also understood his opponent. This was a ruthless person who would never give any opponent a chance to breathe. All right, it's approved. Yes, General. Yella saluted again, then turned around and left. Wuxing's eyes moistened as he watched the Nuzhen's resolute footsteps gradually disappear into the distance. He knew very well that the Nuzhen Cavalry Division only had a little more than 8,000 people, and the White Russians still had 20,000 cavalry that had not moved. The White Russians were tall and strong, and they had immense strength. It was not guaranteed that they would win in a one-on-one battle. The ratio was close to 3-1, and the outcome of this battle was precarious. However, he had no other choice. If he didn't let the Nuzhen Cavalry Division charge out now, once the city was breached, the advantage of the cavalry would be greatly reduced. That would be a huge loss. Looking at Lu Dai's departing figure, Wuxing knew that he might not return this time. His mood instantly became much more downcast. That night, both the Third Corps and the White Russians had a good night's sleep. They knew that the final battle would be tomorrow, and they had to use this opportunity to recuperate and preserve their strength for tomorrow's battle. However, on a mountain path a few hundred li away, a group of 20,000 cavalrymen was galloping quickly with 3 horses each. Under the limited moonlight, the cavalrymen were racing against time. They came like the wind and left like lightning, heading straight for Tove City. The sky was finally bright, and the White Russians outside the city started cooking. Steam rose from the camp, and smoke rose in spirals. In Tove City, Wuxing had already changed into a clean set of armor and walked out of the barracks. Last night, he gave the order to take out all the food in the city for the army's breakfast. For this reason, some of the White Russians in the city had their food stored in their homes searched, causing many people to cry. Wuxing couldn't care less about this. If these were Han people, he would rather starve to death than steal food from them. However, they were a foreign race. The 6th young master had said that those who were not of his race would have different intentions. Since that was the case, so what if they stole food? What could they do to him? If they wanted to blame someone, they could only blame the White Russians led by Ivan outside the city. Both sides seemed to have foreseen something, and neither side was in a hurry. The breakfast lasted for 2 hours. At around 9 o'clock in the morning, the two sides finally got into position, ready to fight to the death. Cannons were pushed to the front of the White Russians. The black cannons were aimed at the walls of Tove City, ready to fire at any moment. General, why don't we capture some of the civilians and bring them up to the city walls? That way, the White Russians will have some reservations, the 1st Division's commander, Min Fu, suggested to Wuxing. No need. Wuxing shook his head without hesitation. He had already robbed the White Russians of their food, and he had already let them down. How could he joke around with their lives? Furthermore, based on his understanding of Ivan, even if he captured the White Russians and brought them up to the city walls, he would not stop Ivan from ordering the cannons to fire. It was still the same words. The other party was a ruthless person, a person who would not easily give up in order to achieve his goal. Since that was the case, why bother? Not only would it disgust Ivan, but it would also disgust him. After rejecting Min Fu's suggestion, Wu Sheng looked to his side. When he did not see Commander Yella, he knew that Yella was ready. With a sigh, he raised his head again, and his eyes were filled with determination. Everyone listen to my orders. When the cannon booms, everyone find cover and hide. After the order is given, all soldiers will fire their bows and arrows. Let's give the enemy a fierce wave of attacks first. Wu Sheng was very familiar with cannons. After all, they were the Cold Vanguard Division's foundation, and they were the first to use guns and cannons. However, in the past few years, they had not received any support, and the Type 95 had run out of ammunition. Now, he had found a safe place to hide them. Since he had played with guns and cannons before, he knew the power of these things, so he had already prepared a countermeasure. After the soldiers heard the order, they responded in unison. Under the leadership of the company commander, platoon leader, and squad leader, they each found a safe place to hide and took out all their bows and arrows, preparing for the final battle. Under the city gate tower, 20 cannons were slowly pushed forward. They stopped 300 meters away from Toph City as if there was no one around. Some of the cannons of the White Russians were made by themselves, and some were bought from Western merchants. Some of the better cannons had a range of 3 to 4 kilometers, which was much better than the ones made by Beiming. However, Ivan still gave the order to push the cannons to a distance of 300 meters. He did not want to create enough psychological pressure for the 5-star army to defend the city. After the 20 cannons were placed, Ivan rode on his horse and shouted from the middle of the army, giving the order to fire. Boom boom boom. Boom boom boom. The cannons shot into the sky and quickly landed on the city walls of Toph City. Immediately, a series of earth-shaking sounds could be heard. Then, rocks flew everywhere from the explosion. Pieces of the city walls also began to peel off, falling everywhere. Smoke and dust filled the sky, and the ground shook. At this moment, the 3rd-star army could only hide and take the hits. They did not have the strength to fight back at all. The commander of the Wu Sheng army hid in a safe bunker. His face was dark the whole time. He thought to himself hopefully, just you wait. When the 6th young master comes, he will show you what a real cannon is. When that time comes, I hope you can still be so arrogant. It was as if he was chanting scriptures in his heart. After about half an hour, the sound of the cannons finally stopped. Wu Sheng opened his eyes and shouted, "The enemy is about to attack the city. Everyone, prepare your bows and arrows." Under the city walls, after the sound of the cannons, the White Russians began to attack. In the previous cannon fire, not only did more than half of the city walls outside Toph City fall off, a part of the city walls also collapsed. This was a city wall made of mountain rocks. There was no cement to adhere to it, so it was indeed much worse in terms of sturdiness. There was a serious gap in the city walls, and the White Russians moved forward along the collapsed corner. The White Russians at the front were soldiers with shields in their hands. They were preparing to defend themselves against an attack from arrows. Fire! As Commander Wu Sheng shouted from the top of the city gate tower, tens of thousands of arrows were released. Countless arrows appeared from the sky and fell to the ground. The shields were effective, and in a short period of time, countless shields were pierced by arrows. One White Russian soldier after another fell to the ground due to the lack of protection, or some of the people who had been hit by arrows were howling on the ground. However, this was not enough to stop the battle. Even more White Russian soldiers raised their muskets and swords and charged forward. War was cruel, and this was especially true. When a large number of White Russian soldiers took advantage of the opening and rushed up the tower, the most brutal close combat began. One side wanted to rush up the city walls and occupy this place. The other side wanted to defend this place and not allow anyone to rush up. When their goals were in conflict, the only thing that mattered was who had the bigger fist and who had the final say. On top of the city walls, after a large number of White Russian soldiers swarmed in, many soldiers from the 5-star army also charged out. They held swords, sabers, and spears in their hands as they charged at the White Russian soldiers who were much taller than them. Chapter 14:15. Papa Papa. Papa Papa. With the sound of gunfire and smoke rising, the soldiers of the 5-star army who rushed forward were hit by the bullets and fell to the ground with blood all over their bodies. The distance of a few dozen meters was filled with human lives. Taking advantage of the short distance and the time taken for the other side to reload their gunpowder, the two sides finally clashed and began to engage in close combat. Under the brandishing of swords and sabers, heads were tossed high into the air one after another. Limbs were chopped off and fell to the ground. Lives were quickly lost one after another. There was no absolute victor here. Even if the side that survived in the end, it would be a Pyrrhic victory. Under the blades and swords, there was no distinction between identity and status. It was only about who was more agile, stronger, and luckier. The cruel close combat on the city gate tower unfolded. Ivan watched all of this with a smile on his face. Since the army had already climbed up the city gate tower, it meant that the initial victory had begun. With the advantage in numbers, he was 100% confident that he could win this battle. It was just a matter of time. His gaze was no longer focused on the city gate tower. He already had an idea of the situation there. He was now looking at the south gate of Tove City. He was waiting for something. Amidst the expectant gazes, the southern city gate opened from the inside as expected. Strong horses rushed out from the city, and cavalry warriors with sabers in their hands roared as they charged into the battlefield. They're finally out. Seeing the cavalry charging out of the city, Ivan was not only fearless, but he was also very happy. Then he said to the messenger beside him, "Raise the flag and order the cavalry to charge." The 20,000 White Russian cavalry that had been waiting on both sides of the army saw the flag and quickly charged from both sides. Their target was the Nuzan Cavalry Division charging out of the city. As the division commander, Yella led the charge at the very front. Behind him was a group of 40 to 50 cavalrymen. At this moment, they were using Yella as the tip of the arrow formation, charging forward at high speed. Even though they could see the White Russian cavalry approaching from afar, none of them showed a trace of fear. The cavalry charge had always been a straight line. If anyone was scared or cowardly during this process, it would only create an opportunity for the enemy to kill them. The Nuzan Cavalry Division soldiers knew this very well. Everyone shouted loudly as if they wanted to vent the anger in their hearts. The two torrents got closer and closer, and then they quickly collided. Next, it was the arrow tip against the arrow tip. A battle of life and death had begun. The arrow tip formation is indeed powerful. Ivan looked at everything that happened and said with emotion. He was a person with great learning ability. Ever since he saw the new army use this formation to defeat the Golden Horde cavalry with the same number of people, he learned this method. Now that he was using it, he was very satisfied with the results. In a short period of time, both the city walls and the city walls had entered a white-hot tragic battle. Almost every second, someone died. At this moment, human lives seemed so ordinary and worthless. The flames of the battle continued, because both sides and the cannons were no longer useful. Ivan also ordered the cannoneers to pick up swords and sabers and use them as echelons of the army. He needed to send these soldiers up when the Third Army could no longer hold on. At that time, they would be the straw that broke the camel's back, the key to victory. 2 hours passed, and the battlefield was shrouded in the stench of blood, making people want to vomit. However, no one seemed to notice. The dead were already dead, while the living were still fighting, trying to seize a chance to live from the hands of the Grim Reaper. It's about time. After the battle had lasted for nearly 4 hours, Ivan said with emotion. Then, the flag was raised high again. The moment it was waved down, the 20,000 White Russian soldiers all pressed forward. The addition of these new forces would be an important factor in tipping the scales of victory. On the city gate tower, Wuxia raised his saber and swung it down. Another White Russian soldier was killed at his feet. Covered in blood, his killing intent caused the White Russian soldiers on the other side to involuntarily retreat. Using this time, he looked at the situation on the battlefield and his brows furrowed. At this point, all of the new army soldiers had joined the battle, even the logistic soldiers and medics were no exception. However, they were only temporarily undefeated. And now, Ivan had sent another 20,000 White Russian soldiers. With this force, he could foresee that the new army's defeat was inevitable. Sixth young master, I'm afraid I won't be able to see you again in the future. I only hope that you can take revenge for this general. Before I die, I will definitely kill a few more White Russian soldiers to prove that the dignity of the 5-star army is inviolable. Wu Sheng roared, "Fight for the dignity of the 5-star army." This shout quickly attracted the attention of the other soldiers. Immediately, the other division commanders and officers also shouted, "Fight for the dignity of the 5-star army." In that instant, the morale of the 5-star army soldiers, who had been suppressed, began to rise, forcing the White Russian soldiers, who had a certain advantage, to retreat. However, as more White Russian reinforcements arrived, this momentum was finally suppressed and pushed back. Not only that, but with the addition of the 20,000 White Russian soldiers, the 5-star army was suppressed to the point where they could not raise their heads. After more than 4 hours of bitter fighting, many of the warriors found it difficult to even lift their swords, let alone injure or kill their enemies. Does the heavens want my third army to die? Wu Sheng, who also felt his arms go numb, couldn't help but roar after cutting down another White Russian soldier. Following his shout, a boundless green light suddenly appeared on the east side of Toph City. Then, it quickly approached the battlefield at a speed visible to the naked eye. What is that? Wu Sheng wasn't the only one who saw this scene. Many soldiers and White Russian soldiers also saw it, but because they were too far away, many people didn't know what it was. Ivan also saw this scene, but his face was filled with confusion. He looked at General Vanya and asked, "What's that? A green light that can move, what is it?" "I don't know." General Vanya shook his head with a confused expression. On the city wall, Wu Sheng also didn't understand what was going on. However, 2nd Division Commander Chun Yang killed 2 White Russian soldiers and came to his side. "General, do you think that is our uniform?" "Uniform?" Wu Sheng's eyes widened when he heard this. He used to have a green uniform with the rank of senior colonel, and he looked very handsome in it. However, that was a few years ago. Ever since he entered the depths of this area, his uniform had been damaged. Without new uniforms, it became a collection and was stored away. After that, he didn't know where it ended up, and it became a memory in the depths of his heart. Now that Chun Yang reminded him, a memory that he hadn't seen for a long time instantly popped up in his mind. When he saw the green light getting closer and closer, Wu Sheng shouted excitedly, "Yes, that must be the color of our uniform. That is our reinforcements, our reinforcements are here." As he shouted, Wu Sheng didn't forget to wave his hands and shout. His appearance quickly attracted the attention of the other soldiers. The originally low morale and weak army seemed to have been rejuvenated after hearing the commander's words. Suddenly, they were filled with energy. When they raised their swords, they found that they were no longer as weak as before. The reinforcements were here, which meant that there was hope. There was also meaning in persevering. At this moment, everyone's potential was stimulated, and they were filled with energy again like hungry men who had seen delicious food. The soldiers of the 3rd star were like middle-aged old men who had been rejuvenated. They actually managed to push the White Russians back dozens of meters in a very short period of time, and had a 50-50 standoff on the city gate tower. On the open ground outside the city, Yella was fighting a bloody battle with the White Russians with bloodshot eyes. In 4 hours, more than half of his cavalry division had been killed or injured. If it weren't for the strict military discipline, and if it weren't for the fact that he was still persevering on the battlefield, the army would have been defeated a long time ago. When he shouted to fight for the dignity of the 5-star army on the city gate tower, Yella had already decided to fight to the death. Since he thought that killing 1 was enough for him and killing 2 was enough for him, he was ready to die. It was also at this moment that he saw the green tide, and he saw the appearance of hope. "Comrades, our reinforcements are here. Our reinforcements are here. Hold on a little longer, and victory will be right in front of us." The appearance of hope made Yella seem like a different person. His body seemed to be a lot more nimble while riding on his warhorse. Whether it was on the city gate or below, the Third Star Army began to counterattack and brought pressure to the White Russians. Ivan, who was standing in the middle of the army, felt all of this. He also saw the approaching green tide and knew that Wu Sheng's reinforcements must have arrived. Where did their reinforcements come from? And they're all cavalry? Could it be a trap set by the Golden Horde? General Vanya asked with a puzzled expression. No, the cavalry of the Golden Horde doesn't have such a uniform. It should be the 5-star army. Ivan's expression was a little ugly. He didn't expect that Wu Sheng's reinforcements would appear so close to victory. He saw that there were still 5,000 soldiers behind him. 1,000 of them were on horseback and 4,000 paces. This was the last of his strength. He clenched his teeth and revealed a determined gaze as he said, "Their reinforcements are not that many, less than 20,000. We have cannons in our hands and can completely give them a head-on blow. This way, victory and defeat will not be decided yet." Chapter 14:16. Ivan didn't want to give up just like that. In his eyes, Wu Sheng was an outstanding general. It was a blessing to have such a person as a friend. If he was an enemy, then he had to be eliminated. Otherwise, it would always be a big problem. The war had already reached this point. If he gave up now, he really didn't know when he would be able to surround the other party again. He might as well go all out and put all his forces into it. It was just the right time to test the combat power of the so-called 5-star army. He put all the 2,000 reserve troops in place, and all the cannoneers were in place. They began to adjust the direction of the cannons. They were just waiting for the green tide to enter the range to give them a good show. The green tide coming from afar was the world's first cavalry army. Led by Commander Tian Hu, they were led by 2nd Division Lu Duo and 4th Division Su Ku. In addition to the military guard regiment, there were a total of 18,000 people. 1 man and 3 horses, led by Deputy Division Commander Yi Dai, finally arrived outside Tove City at the last moment. Still far away, the chaotic scene outside the city fell into the eyes of Tian Hu and the generals. At the same time, with the help of binoculars, the 20 cannons of the White Russian army were also clearly seen. They had already learned from Yi Dai that the White Russian army was good at using firearms, and the caliber of the cannons in their hands was not small. It was precisely because of this that they gradually became evenly matched with the old power of the Golden Horde. Cannons? They can deal with the Mongolian cavalry, but they are still a little lacking if they want to deal with the world's first cavalry army. Tian Hu's eyes revealed a look of contempt, but when he gave the order as he rode, he was very cautious. He said to Hu Helu, who was already the head of the guards, "Inform everyone that the other party has cannons. Don't let them hit them. Tell the soldiers to disperse and advance. Change the arrow formation to a 3-3 formation. These are solid cannons. They won't explode, so it's not a big deal. Also, inform 2nd Division Lu Duo to bring people to destroy the enemy's artillery position. Don't let them stand there and make people hate them." "Yes, Commander." After Hu Helu agreed, he quickly went to send the message. Not long after, the cavalrymen who were originally running in a group dispersed and ran forward in groups of 3. The change in the formation of the world's number 1 cavalry army made it difficult for the White Russian artillerymen who were adjusting the direction of the cannons. This was the first time they had seen such a scattered formation. Without a concentrated enemy, even if the cannons fired, the casualties would be limited. Moreover, each cannon shell was expensive to make. It was not worth it to waste them like this. "Fight, don't be afraid of wasting." Ivan's expression turned ugly. He didn't expect the 5-star army to react so quickly. Especially the cavalry, they actually changed their formation while running. Not only was there no chaos, but they were also very orderly. Just based on this point, they were not any weaker than the 3rd-star army. The stronger the army, the more Ivan couldn't let them survive. No matter what, he still had the initiative on the battlefield. The 3rd-star army was about to be destroyed. As long as he blocked the reinforcements from the 5-star army, after dealing with the 3rd-star army, he wouldn't let a single person from the 5-star army escape. Pass down the order, split the cavalry into half to block the enemy's attack. Order the infantry to attack faster and finish off the 3rd Star Army as soon as possible. Ivan didn't have any intention of backing down. He was even prepared to eliminate the reinforcements from the 5-Star Army. Although the appearance of the reinforcements was out of his expectations, there were only 10,000 of them. He didn't put them in his eyes. On the battlefield, he still had at least 50,000 soldiers. On the other hand, the new 3rd Army only had about 10,000 soldiers. Even with the addition of 20,000 reinforcements, he still had a huge advantage in terms of military strength. What was there to be afraid of? Ivan, who was determined to finish off the 3rd Star Army, didn't realize the existence of danger. He also didn't know the strength of the enemy in front of him. On the contrary, if they were on the grasslands, mentioning the number 1 cavalry army in the world of the 5-Star Army, many opponents would be afraid before they even fought. They wouldn't be able to calmly fight to the death like this. Ivan's order was passed down, and the artillery was ready to fire. Some of the cavalry on the battlefield also adjusted their direction and went straight to Tianhu's army in the distance. Good. Seeing that there were enemy cavalry blocking the road ahead, Tianhu's face flashed with excitement. This time, after attacking the far east with Yang Chendong, he didn't have a chance to fight to his heart's content. The opponents he encountered were so weak that they couldn't withstand a single blow. He hoped that the White Russian army wouldn't disappoint him this time. On the battlefield, generals hoped that their opponents would be weaker so that their chances of winning would be higher. It was rare for Tianhu to think like this, but it was enough to prove his confidence in the cavalry under his command. The green tide finally entered the battlefield from the northeast under the eyes of tens of thousands of people. What greeted them was 20 iron bullets. They came from afar, leaping towards the number 1 cavalry army. Faced with the roar of the cannons, even the well-trained warhorses of the White Russian army seemed a little restless. However, Tianhu's army didn't have any reaction. Their charging speed didn't decrease in the slightest. Most of the soldiers didn't even try to dodge. They just pressed their bodies against the backs of their horses to reduce the wind resistance. Under the 3-3 system, the effect of the solid cannonballs was very limited. Except for a few soldiers who were unlucky and were hit by the iron bullets, most of the cavalry charged towards the White Russian army without slowing down. The distance between the two sides was rapidly closing. 800 meters, 600 meters, 300 meters, 100 meters, 80 meters. Seeing that the battle was about to begin, many of the White Russian cavalrymen had already raised their sabers above their heads and were ready to chop down. The soldiers of the world's number 1 cavalry army who were lying on their horses finally made their move. At some point, a crossbow had appeared in their hands. Then, when they were less than 40 meters away from the White Russian cavalrymen, they pulled the trigger and fired the Big Dipper crossbow. One arrow after another flew towards the target. With the continuous development of the steel-making industry, the Crimson City arsenal had modified the Big Dipper crossbow. Not only were the springs more powerful, even the arrows had become sharper. After testing, they could break through 4 centimeters of planks within 80 meters, 6 centimeters of planks within 50 meters, and 5 centimeters of armor within 40 meters without a problem. This time, Tianhu's Big Dipper crossbow had used such sharp arrows. When the arrows were fired, at such a close distance and without any warning, the sound of arrows piercing flesh could be heard. Following this, the White Russian army fell from their warhorses one after another. Because the warhorses were too fast, it was impossible to see what had happened from the distance. After the two horses collided, the White Russian army fell from their warhorses and collapsed on the ground. There were more than 7,000 White Russian cavalry, but in just a single exchange, nearly half of them had fallen. The remaining 3,000 or so cavalry could only defend under the attacks of the number 1 cavalry army's 3-by-3 formation. They were unable to attack at all. What happened? Ivan's eyes were wide open. Just as he was waiting for the 5-star army's reinforcements to be blocked or even heavily injured, he saw his own cavalry falling from their horses as if they had been possessed. Like dumplings, they fell to the ground one after another. This completely unexpected outcome had caught Ivan off guard. His expression was no longer playful and confident, but rather nervous and angry. "Young master, we should leave quickly. These Han people are too powerful. They have already broken through our cavalry formation and are rushing over." Seeing that the situation was not good, Vanya hurriedly shouted. Ivan was the favorite son of the Grand Duke of Blindness and the most likely descendant to inherit his legacy. If something really happened to him here, not only would he be punished, but even the family behind him would be punished and killed without leaving a single one alive. Vanya was extremely nervous as he felt threatened. On the contrary, Ivan wasn't afraid at all. On the contrary, he drew his saber and shouted, "Don't be afraid, the enemy's numbers are inferior to ours. We just need to charge and destroy their attacks. Victory will still belong to us in the end. Come, charge with this general." Seeing that the situation on the battlefield wasn't good, not only did Ivan not run, he even shouted and wanted to charge forward. Vanya wasn't going to let that happen. He hurriedly gave a few bodyguards beside him a look. Then, 4 cavalrymen appeared behind Ivan. One of them raised his right hand and struck the back of Ivan's head. Ivan's excited shouts immediately stopped and he fainted. "All cavalrymen, retreat and protect young master. All infantry, stay behind to stop the enemy." Without Ivan, Vanya became the highest-ranking general here. His words became the new order. The bravery of the 5-star army's reinforcements shocked Vanya. At the same time, it also made him feel the existence of danger. As the representative of Pskov city in the Rossi Principality, Vanya was able to survive until now not because of his bravery, but because of his amazing foresight. He knew when to make the right decision. Reality proved that he was right. The 5-star army's cavalrymen, who were still several miles away, arrived in front of him in the blink of an eye. They rushed into the artillery formation in front of the city as if there was no resistance. After a series of slashes with their sabers, the artillery soldiers were defeated and left behind a pile of corpses. Then, a portion of the cavalrymen led by a general wearing a white cloak went straight to the center of the army. However, Vanya had already escaped with the unconscious Ivan. He left behind thousands of soldiers to form a long snake formation to block the pursuit of the 5-star army. Chapter 1417. Vanya immediately took the young master and fled. Due to the urgency of the matter, he didn't even leave behind a proper sentence. This was the White Russian soldiers who had bitterly stayed behind. Without a commander, the other generals didn't know what to do next. It was inevitable that a trace of chaos would appear in the army. At this moment, Tian Hu and the others launched a fierce attack. They used the Big Dipper crossbows to shoot at the enemies from afar, while they used the divine sabers to slash at the enemies at close range. In just half an hour, the first deserter appeared in the White Russian army, followed by a second, a third, and an increasing number. The valiant strength displayed by the world's #1 cavalry army quickly frightened the White Russian soldiers. When they discovered that their opponents were extremely strong, ferocious, and equipped with excellent equipment, they were far from being a match for them. Wu Xing gave a loud shout and launched an all-out counterattack from the center of the city. The White Russian army's morale finally hit rock bottom, and they began to disobey orders and flee in a large area. The commander wasn't present, and there were no unified orders. In addition, the world's #1 cavalry army was so valiant that no one could stop them wherever they went. Although they still had the advantage in terms of numbers, no one was able to form a unified resistance in a situation where the morale of the army was low. Even the White Russian cavalry that was fighting with the Nuzan cavalry left behind thousands of corpses and fled. Victory? Victory! Seeing that the Russian army had already escaped from the battlefield, and only his brothers were left outside the city walls, Wu Xing suddenly shouted. Then, with a plop, he knelt on the ground and fainted. After fighting for such a long time, under great psychological pressure, he suddenly relaxed at this moment. Finally, his body could no longer hold it in and he fainted. For hours later, Ivan finally woke up in the carriage. When he opened his eyes, he discovered that Tove City was no longer there. He was sitting in a simple carriage. He hurriedly shouted, "Men, men! Young master, you're awake." The curtains of the carriage were lifted and a head popped out. Who else could it be but Wanya? When Ivan saw Vanya, his head was still throbbing with pain. He only remembered that he was commanding the army on the battlefield just a moment ago. How did he end up in a carriage? He asked in confusion, "Where are we?" "Young master, we are returning to Moscow," Vanya explained while observing Ivan's expression. "Return to the city?" Fan felt that his head was not as painful as before, so he asked, "Why did you return to the city? Was Wu Sheng's third corps destroyed?" Evidently, that blow had indeed stunned Ivan, so much so that he still couldn't recall what had just happened. Vanya had no choice but to explain everything that had happened outside Toph City. When he talked about how he had no choice but to knock Ivan out, his voice became much softer. This kind of action was somewhat disrespectful to his superior. If Ivan insisted on making an issue out of this matter, he was afraid that he would suffer a lot. When he continued to talk about how the cavalry of the 5-star army defeated the White Russians very quickly, he still had a lingering fear in his heart. He clearly didn't expect the cavalry to be so powerful and capable of fighting. Ivan was completely awake now. After listening to the entire process of the battle, he wasn't too angry. After all, as the future Emperor Ivan, he still had this bit of tolerance. However, he still had a gloomy look on his face. He was worried about how the cavalry of the 5-star army was so powerful that they weren't even afraid of cannons. Although the cannons were solid shells that had a long range and weren't lethal, the cannons had a short range. However, the fact that the cavalry wasn't afraid of cannons and their horses weren't even affected by the cannons was enough to prove that this army had seen cannons before. "General Vanya, this young master won't argue with you about this matter this time. However, there definitely won't be a next time." Ivan pretended to be angry as he said this. He was also reminding the other party that he couldn't be knocked out again. "Thank you for your understanding, young master. This one won't dare to do it again." Vanya let out a long sigh of relief. No matter what, this one was finally over. "Alright, now, immediately send out scouts to keep an eye on the 5-star army. We need to know their every move and their whereabouts." Ivan nodded and then made arrangements. He had already thought it through. No matter how powerful the enemy was, this was still the territory of the Ross Duchy. He would never allow other forces to run rampant and do whatever they wanted here. He wanted to go back and see his father-in-law. He wanted to ask for reinforcements and completely defeat and annihilate the 5-star army. Bulgar City, the northernmost city of the Golden Horde. As usual, the city gates opened in the early morning, and the number of people coming and going gradually increased. It was as lively as some of the cities of the Xianxia. The only difference was that the people coming and going here often led horses or other livestock. In this economically backward nation, bartering was still very popular among the people. On the contrary, the use of silver was sometimes limited. Behind a mound outside the city, Beta Persei put down a pair of binoculars in his hand, then turned sideways and whispered to Yang Chendong, "Young master, everything in the city is normal. Our people have already sneaked in. It seems that the other party didn't take any precautions." Lying on his back next to Beta Persei was Yang Chendong. At this time, he was holding an unknown grass stick in his mouth and looking at the blue sky above his head. Today's weather was good. The sky was blue, and there were a few cotton candy-like white clouds floating in the sky. It gave off a poetic and picturesque feeling. Tian, whose telegram had arrived yesterday. He had already joined forces with Commander Wu Sheng. Considering that the army had suffered heavy losses and had more wounded, they were heading to a Russian city called Oksino. They wanted to take the city and use it as a base for the army to rest and recuperate. In the telegram, Tian Hu explained that the White Russians had cannons and muskets. He also said that although the enemy's cannons were solid shells, they could shoot up to 3 miles away. In terms of range, they were already the strongest enemy the 5-star Corps had ever come into contact with. He asked if they could send a cold front unit to help them suppress the enemy's firepower on the battlefield in order to suppress them in the future. Yang Chendong had already mentally prepared himself for the fact that the White Russian army had firearms, and they were relatively powerful. How could they be easy to deal with if they could stand up to the Golden Horde when it was at its peak? How to make up for this gap was far from a problem that could be solved with the help of Wu Sheng's Third Army. Although Yang Chendong was mentally prepared, the fact that the enemy's cannons could hit more than 3 miles away still greatly exceeded his expectations. At this moment, he could see the difference between the great Ming dynasty and the other countries. To think that they were still living in their own beautiful dreams and really thought that they were a great and powerful country. Look, the enemy's cannons can hit several times farther than yours. If they really fought, would you still be a match for them? In history, the Rasi kingdom had been suppressed by the Mongols too much and needed time to recuperate. Furthermore, their territory was large enough and their population was not large, so they did not have such great ambitions. Otherwise, they would have been able to push their way over from land and end the rule of the great Ming dynasty without even needing to do anything. As he sighed in his heart, Yang Chendong felt even more pressure. Outside of the great Ming dynasty, the Western countries were undergoing all kinds of reforms and rising. If he did not take advantage of this period of time to destroy them before they became fully powerful, it would be even more difficult to deal with them in the future. He was pressed for time. Yang Chendong would naturally fulfill the request in Tianhu's telegram. He had already sent a telegram to the army headquarters in Chichen City when he left the Far East region and asked them to send an elite cold vanguard division to help him. Due to the importance of the Golden Horde and the Russian Empire, they had sent the elite 2nd Division of the Cold Vanguard Division, Shaofeng. Through the telegram, he knew that they had already entered the Arrow region and were not far behind him. He sent out a telegram and asked Division Commander Shaofeng to send a regiment to meet up with Commander Tianhu. The reason Yang Chendong only sent one regiment was because he had his own plans. Faced with 2 enemies that could be described as huge, he would definitely not attack both sides with only 100,000 soldiers. He wanted to fight them one by one. The conclusion he came to was to attack the Golden Horde first, while the Russian Empire would focus on defense. If it was only to defend the city, a cold vanguard division with their cannons and muskets should be enough to stabilize the situation. At the same time, he had to speed up his attack on the Golden Horde. His first target was the city of Bulgar. A while ago, the Golden Horde had sent troops to New Xia City from here, destroying Wu Sheng's years of hard work. He would avenge this grudge on behalf of his subordinates. Considering the lack of information at that time, the appearance of the 5-star army should not have attracted much attention in the Golden Horde's territory. What he needed to do now was to take over as many cities as possible before the news was made public. He needed to create a place to store all kinds of supplies and lay down a sufficient foundation for his attack on the Golden Horde. Now that he had a military objective, the next step was to implement it. After discussing with Shibi and the others, they suggested that they should infiltrate Pyoga before the battle. After all, most of the people in the city were Mongols. There were also a small number of White Russians. In the new Second Army, there were quite a number of such soldiers. Infiltrating the city would not be a problem. This would allow them to coordinate with the enemy from the inside and outside. Chapter 14:18. One of the reasons for making such a military decision was that Yang Chendong wanted a complete Bulgar city, not a ruined city. Not only that, he also wanted the Mongolian soldiers in the city. Considering the long journey, if the country sent troops here for everything, the losses would be too great. If he could get a Mongolian army here for his own use, the problem of insufficient military strength could be easily solved. While he was thinking about this, Beta Persei looked at Yang Chendong with a look of seeking his opinion, as if to say, "Young master, when are we going to make a move? Say something. Why are you looking at me? Just follow the plan." Yang Chendong rolled his eyes at Beta Persei and turned his head to the side. He knew that the other party was asking for his opinion. After all, according to the rules, once a military plan was formulated, even a leader like him could not casually intervene or change it. The reason why second young Master Yang was still looking at him like that was because he wanted to personally go to the battlefield. Speaking of which, this person was really wronged to be his family general. He should be leading the army to gallop on the battlefield and expand the territory. Yang Chendong did not agree to let Beta Persei follow the army. Swords had no eyes, and now there was no one more convenient by his side. He did not want to see anything happen to Beta Persei. There were many things that he had to do himself. Beta Persei, who did not get permission to fight, looked a little wronged. As a man in his 30s, he pretended to be a wronged little wife. It was difficult for the burly Beta Persei. But when he made a few consecutive actions that made him want to vomit, he found that the young master had turned around again and did not even look at him. He knew that his performance was in vain. The young master had made up his mind not to allow him to participate in the battle. He could only put away his wronged face and said to Badao Jiang, the deputy captain of the Black Cavalry Brigade, who was watching the show, "Go and pass on the young master's order. Everything will be done according to the previous plan." When Ba Daojiang saw a young heir's darkened face, he quickly put away his sinister smile and agreed with a serious expression. Then he turned around and left. According to the military plan, a part of the new Second Army's infantry division and a part of the foreign Russian army were the first to sneak into Bulgaria. The infantry division's commander, Yang Chunfeng, was a student of the Yang Family Academy in Chilean City. He was a standard Han Chinese, but he learned Mongolian and Russian well in the academy. In the final military thesis examination, he was ranked at the top. After graduation, he went directly to the army and started as a platoon leader. Along the way, he made countless contributions and became the commander of the new Second Army's infantry division. This person was rough but meticulous, and he was proficient in 3 languages. It was reassuring to leave this kind of infiltration mission to him. The commander of the White Russian division was given to Nikolaev. This person's qualifications and ability were naturally not enough, but he had a bitter background. He could unite most of the White Russians, and he was very loyal to Yang Chendong. The people of his tribe were all in the Far East region's All City. There was no need to worry about such people rebelling, so he was given the position of acting commander. Fortunately, Ahuli surrendered. This person had been a great Khan before, and Yang Chendong also gave him the opportunity to choose his own path. After he understood the structure and glorious history of the 5-star army, he finally decided to join the army and was directly appointed as the deputy commander. He cooperated with Nikolaev to manage the White Russian division. With Ahuli's help, the military had been greatly supplemented, and Yang Chendong could be more at ease. The next step was to let the other party undergo the baptism of war. It would be much easier to obtain an elite army after a lot of tempering. Naturally, there would be losses in this process, and a lot of people would be eliminated like sand being washed away by waves. This was the cruelty of war. This was the only way to obtain elite soldiers. This was the reason why the merciful could not command an army. Inside the Bulgar city, Yang Chunfeng's subordinates, Nikolaev, Ahuli, and the others had already infiltrated the city. They either pretended to be passers-by or people who came to seek refuge. There were also people dressed in ragged clothes who pretended to be refugees. They were hiding in various parts of the city, waiting to coordinate with the main army from the inside. As the largest city in the north of the Golden Horde, not only would there be White Russian merchants here, but there would also be some people from small tribes in the nearby forests who would come here to buy things. There were also people who did not have anything to eat, and those who could not survive would come here to beg. They were all called refugees. It was because of this that the population of the city was not fixed. Perhaps one day, there would be more refugees, and the city's population would increase. The Mongolian soldiers who were in charge of security here were used to this. Of course, this had a lot to do with the pride and arrogance in their hearts. No matter what, this place belonged to the Golden Horde, and no one had ever tried to attack them here. Using this loophole, no matter if it was Yang Chunfeng, Nikolaev, or Ahuli, when they entered the city, they did not attract any attention. Ahuli, on the other hand, had a look of reluctance, especially when he looked at Nikolaev, who was dressed in noble clothes. He said unhappily, "Look at you, it's a waste of good clothes on you." Ahuli looked down on Nikolaev. This was a form of racial prejudice. At that time, most Mongolians looked down on the White Russians. After all, they had suppressed them for more than 200 years. But how could Nikolaev look up to a Huli? Hearing these complaints, Nikolaev snorted and said, "I am now the acting commander, and you are only the deputy commander. According to the rank, I am higher than you, and I have to listen to the commander's orders. Don't you know that?" This time, a Huli did not say anything. He just snorted to show his dissatisfaction. He was willing to join the 5-star army, not because of Nikolaev. He really saw many Mongolian brothers in the 5-star army, and he heard from them that many Mongolians were living better and better under King Wunan of Daimyong. As mentioned before, a Huli was a Mongolian Khan with his own ideas. He was a leader who wanted to let the people under his rule live a better life. To achieve this goal, he had made a lot of efforts and made a lot of concessions. For example, in the original Great Crow City, there were many White Russians there, but they had never seen him bully anyone. This was proof. He had ideas and made efforts, but the effect was not good. Later, he thought about it, and it was because he was not big enough. Now, Yang Chendong was here. He had more ideas than him, and he did things better. More importantly, he was strong enough. Not only did he have a vast territory, but he was also very rich. A Huli, who knew all this, did not mind hitching a ride. His request was very simple. He wanted the Mongolians to live a stable life and not have to worry about food. For this goal, he almost lost his life. Now, he was just one of Yang Chendong's subordinates. What was so unacceptable about it? A Huli surrendered to Yang Chendong, not Nikolaev. Especially when he found that Nikolaev had a deep prejudice against the Mongolians, he would often talk back to him. He was venting his dissatisfaction, and also reminding Nikolaev not to be prejudiced against the Mongolians. After being a Khan for so many years, he knew when to stop. This time, after reminding Nikolaev, he did not say anything. Instead, he stared at the Mongolian general's residence across the street. He had already asked around. This was the residence of the Bulgar general. If he could control this place as soon as he made a move, then everything would be much easier. After noticing a Huli's gaze, Nikolaev's expression became much more serious. "I say, Vice Division Commander, when we make a move, can you guarantee that you can control this place?" There was a trace of uncertainty in his voice. After all, Nikolaev was only someone from a small tribe. Although he was very brave, his experience was limited. Compared to before, when he was just a poor boy, there was too much of a difference between him and this so-called general. Where did his confidence come from? On the other hand, a Huli's face was indifferent. He was someone who had been a Khan. What kind of situation had he not seen before? It was just a general of a city. Naturally, he would not be scared. "It's fine. When we make a move, I will be the first to rush in. You just need to bring people to guard the outside and prevent anyone from escaping." Hearing such a promise, Nikolaev nodded in relief. Although he hated the Mongols deep in his bones, if it were not for them, his tribe would not have to live such a poor life. However, he was still very confident in a Huli's ability. Since he said so, there should not be any problems. Nikolaev, who was pretending to be a rich White Russian merchant, walked slowly on this street. From time to time, he would stop in front of some open-air stalls and ask about the price of some goods. It seemed that there was nothing wrong with it, but in fact, his heart was in a mess. This was the first time he had carried out such a mission. In the past, he only thought that when two armies fought, they would pull apart their stances and compete with courage and perseverance. However, after joining the 5-star army, he realized that even if it was a war, there was a very special way. If he used it well, he could win with fewer people and win with the weak. Like a studious student, Nikolaev studied with all his might. It was because of this spirit and his innate affinity that he was able to become friends with many White Russians. Yang Chendong appointed him as a substitute teacher. The panicked Nikolaev forced himself to calm down. However, his panicked eyes still betrayed him. From time to time, he would look at the general's residence in the distance. At the same time, he kept asking himself, why hasn't the main force of the 5-star army attacked yet? As if they felt his call, the streets suddenly became chaotic. Many Mongol soldiers were running towards this street. Obviously, something urgent must have happened. They were here to report. Chapter 1419. Stop them! Out of instinct, Nicholas shouted to the people on both sides of the street. Then hundreds of strong White Russian men rushed out. Unknowingly, they had sharp cavalry swords in their hands. Seeing more and more soldiers gathering around him, Nicholas couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Then he thought of Ahu. He wanted to see if Ahu had already made his move. After all, he didn't have enough people with him. They wouldn't be able to hold on for long. When he turned around, he realized that the door of the great general's residence was already wide open and he could vaguely hear the clashing sounds of swords and sabers coming from within the residence. This meant that Ahuli had already made his move. Nicholas heaved a sigh of relief. Then he turned to the White Russian soldiers who were gathering around him and said, "Hold on, don't let anyone rush into the general's mansion." As Nicholas spoke, he took a cavalry sword from one of the soldiers. Then he charged with them towards a group of 50 Mongolian soldiers. They were now warriors, and they were no longer the rootless trees from before. Recently, they had also gone through the training of battle formations. Even though they had not fully grasped it, they still managed to cut down the 50 Mongolian cavaliers with their advantage in numbers. After a quarter of an hour, only the White Russian warriors led by Nikolai were left standing on the street. Clean up the battlefield, finish off those who should be dealt with. Treat the injured soldiers immediately. Thinking about the battlefield knowledge that the soldiers of the 5-star army had taught him, Nicholas shouted out. After that, the soldiers started to get busy again. Screams of agony sounded out again. Those were the screams of the Mongol soldiers who hadn't died yet. Some of the soldiers took out the bandages they carried with them and wrapped them around the wounds of their injured comrades. Due to the limited conditions, they could only stop the bleeding first. After the battle, there would naturally be medical personnel from the 5-star army to treat them. Just as these were done, the sound of horse hooves came from afar. Nicholas looked over and his face turned ugly. It's actually the Mongolian cavalry. There are about 80 of them. Looking at his side, there were less than 70 soldiers who could still fight with light injuries. In terms of numbers, they were already inferior to the enemy, not to mention infantry against cavalry, which was a natural disadvantage. "Master, what should we do?" A few Russian officers asked Nikolai nervously. "Don't panic. Set up obstacles. Don't let the cavalry rush over so quickly." Nicholas looked to the left and right of the street, and his gaze landed on the wooden boards of the stalls. He pretended to be calm and said, "The chaos just now had already scared away the peddlers and merchants. Many people didn't even take their goods with them because they were afraid of being implicated." After receiving the order, the White Russian soldiers immediately ran to the left and right, taking out everything that could be lifted from both sides of the road and throwing them on the road to form a simple barrier. He knew that these things wouldn't last long, but he had no other choice but to do this. Right now, he could only hope that the main force of the 5-star army would arrive quickly. He hoped that Ahuli would be able to deal with the general's manner quickly. At the very least, it would be much safer to hide there. The Mongolian cavaliers who came from afar had already seen the obstacles on the road and also saw the corpses of their own soldiers. Their expressions changed drastically, and they became very ugly. One of the young generals said angrily, "Release the arrows. Kill these White Russian bastards." After receiving the order, the Mongolian cavalry took out the bows on their backs and started to nock the arrows. Following this, the sound of arrows piercing through the air rang out as they flew towards the White Russian soldiers. "Find a place to hide, quick!" Nicholas shouted as he hid behind a thick wooden board. Just as he finished doing that, the arrows fell and hit the wooden board, creating a series of banging sounds. As a race that grew up on horseback, the Mongolian cavalry's archery skills were very high, and there were very few who could match them. When this wave of arrows came, many of the White Russian soldiers were hit because they didn't hide well enough. There were also some who didn't find a suitable place to hide, and the arrows still pierced through their bodies. Cries of agony rang out around him, which meant that more and more White Russian soldiers had lost their lives. Hearing this, Nikolaev bit his lips. His right hand gripped the saber so tightly that it turned white. After a few rounds of arrows, the Mongolian cavalry had arrived in front of the obstacles. Following this, the cavalry at the front dismounted and started to move the objects. There were also some bleeding corpses. Kill! Feeling the Mongolian cavalry's aura getting closer and closer, Nicholas looked through the gap between the cover and saw that the distance between them was less than 6 meters. He knew that this was the best time to counterattack, so he shouted and led the 30 or so White Russian soldiers who weren't injured to charge out. The sudden battle cry did not cause the Mongolian soldiers to panic. On the contrary, one of them even smiled savagely and charged at Nicholas with a machete. An instant later, the two sides clashed, and the cruel battle of life and death began. As both sides fought, the Mongolian cavalry were unable to shoot their arrows. They simply dismounted and charged over. They wanted to surround Nicholas and the others and kill them all. They did not want to let a single one of them escape. Facing the Mongolian soldiers getting closer and closer, Nicholas only turned around to look at the general's manner before giving up on the idea of entering. He did not want to be looked down on by a huli, and he did not want to be a burden to him. Soldiers, let's go all out. Our names have already been registered. Even if we die in this battle, our families and people in Bugnam of Gojoseon will take care of us. Even if we die, what is there to fear? Seeing that more than 10 of his brothers had died in the battle in a short period of time, Nicholas knew that they were doomed this time. Therefore, he simply gave up on his fantasy and roared loudly with the thought that killing one was enough to break even, and killing two was a win for him. After joining the 5-star army, they had to register. Even if they were just auxiliary soldiers, this way, if something happened to them, their heirs would be able to receive compensation from the 5-star army. This was a form of protection for everyone, and they would not have to worry about what happened after they died on the battlefield. In the past, when there was a war between tribes, if one died, then one's wife and children would become slaves. Now, they were people with an organization. If something happened, not only would their families be able to receive compensation, if someone dared to bully the family of a martyr, they would just have to find an official and someone would support them. It was because of these policies that no one had ever heard of or even thought about before that when Yang Chendong said that he wanted to establish a division outside of Russia, the enthusiasm of the applicants far exceeded everyone's expectations. These people were carefully selected, and those who were not in their prime were not accepted. Otherwise, not to mention 20,000 people, even an army of 50,000 could be gathered. Hearing Nikolaev's shout, the remaining dozen people also had a look of determination to die. Since everything had been arranged, what else was there to worry about? They would just kill. As the saying went, the soft feared the hard feared the unreasonable, and the unreasonable feared those who did not care about their lives. When the dozen Russian soldiers became fugitives, facing the Mongol soldiers who were many times their number, they no longer defended. Instead, they continuously attacked, and the momentum of the Mongol soldiers became sluggish, and they could not help but take a few steps back. Only then did they avoid the Russian soldiers. Come, isn't it just death? Who's afraid of who? Nikolaev borrowed the momentum from before to cut down 2 Mongolian soldiers. At this moment his momentum was at its peak, and when he spoke, his voice was a bit louder. Lunatics, a bunch of lunatics. Don't waste words with them, just shoot them to death. When the Mongol soldiers saw that Nikolaev and his men were not afraid of death and wanted to drag them down with them, they shook their heads and retreated to open up the distance between them. At the same time, they took out their bows and arrows and prepared to shoot. Seeing the Mongol soldiers take out their bows and arrows, Nikolaev was shocked and quickly tried to find cover. However, in such a short period of time, where could he hide? Just as he thought that he was going to die, a voice suddenly shouted, "Put down your weapons immediately, otherwise, your general will die in front of you." The one who shouted was a huli. At this moment he had already walked out of the general's residence, and in his right hand he was holding the Mongol general. In that short period of time, he had brought his own personal guards into the residence, and after a fierce battle, he had captured the enemy general. It was only because Bulgar City had not been in a war for many years that there were less than 50 soldiers defending the residence that Ahuli was able to deal with them in such a short period of time, saving Nikolaev's life. With their general being held hostage, the faces of the Mongol soldiers turned ugly. When they saw that the saber on their general's neck was about to be pulled at any moment, they had no choice but to put down their bows. Many thanks. Nikolaev, who was still in shock, walked to Ahuli's side and said in an unnatural manner, "If you really want to thank me, why don't you let me be your division commander?" Ahuli suddenly made a request. Nikolaev was stunned at first, but he quickly reacted and shook his head. The acting division commander is personally appointed by Bugnam of Gojosian. If you have the ability, go find Bugnam of Gojosian to change your military order. Don't worry, the position of division commander will be mine sooner or later, Ahuli said without a care. The two of them were still bickering, but after what happened just now, it was obvious that their relationship had become much closer. In the words of the future, they had formed a revolutionary friendship. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.